We move voluntarily to feel good, we move to get stronger, we move for peace of mind, and some of us move involuntarily, repeatedly. Hello and welcome to TickFit the podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things movement in both the exercise sphere and in life with Tourette syndrome. This is a platform to discuss Tourette syndrome and its effects on our bodies. We'll speak with movement professionals where we can advocate and educate about Tourette syndrome, while the Tourette community can benefit from the expertise of these individuals. We'll also speak with professionals about Tourette syndrome and other tic disorders. I'm your host, Raquel Cunningham, and I've been on a quest for the past 2 decades to discover the connection between movement, exercise, and our ticking muscles. This is not meant to diagnose or treat Tourette syndrome. There is no cure for Tourette syndrome. We are here to advocate and educate about Tourette through conversation, and anything in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Please always consult with your doctor before beginning any exercise program to make sure that it's right for you. Hey, everybody. Welcome to TickFit the podcast. First, before we get into this and introduce our guest here, I want to acknowledge that there's been a bit of a shift recently in conversation to support those with Tourette syndrome from a multidisciplinary approach. It's a very complex neurological condition with infinite presentation of symptoms. And while people can still achieve extraordinary physical goals with TS, people like Tim Howard in soccer or Quincy Roche in football, Matthew Chapman in baseball, we can still achieve incredible things with TS. For those not pursuing professional sports, there is still a very large group coming forward acknowledging a major effect of movement and exercise in their tic management. So with that, here today we have Dr. Jeff Spencer, father, Olympian, mentor, performance coach, author, and recipient of International Sports Chiropractor of the Year. Jeff not only has the personal experience of competing at the highest level of athletic performance in the Olympics, he also has the experience of helping others attune to their own bodies to the tune of 8 winning Tour de France teams and over 40 gold medals. Hey, Jeff, how's it going? Wait, oh, that was my fault. I muted you. How rude.
Well, that's not a problem. These electronic delays are usually signs that we're going to have a great conversation. So ready to roll here. So yeah, it's going great. Glad to be here and look forward to finding our way through the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. So first, what I appreciate so much about you is that you look at the scaffolding of human potential, both mind and body. So for a group who often feels disconnected, that their bodies can be disconnected from their minds, I think it's so vital to remind people and grow the part of the mind and body that do connect.
Yeah, well, I think it's an interesting conversation because mind is its own conversation. Mind is not brain. Brain is different than mind. And if we look at the brain, well, the brain's a physical object that's got hard wires in it that go very specific places in the body. It's one of the systems, of course, but you can't really separate the brain from the body. They're really one and the same. The conversation about consciousness and awareness in mind is a kind of a different level of conversation here. But suffice it to say is that none of this is disconnected. It all shares a common thread where there's a level of influence on the body and on our thought patterns and on our central nervous system interpretation of our experience. It does influence the way that the mind makes decisions, for sure.
Absolutely. So let's first start out with your cycling background. Like, how did you get started in cycling?
Well, I remember it as I must have been around 10 or 11 or so, and there were boys in my neighborhood that were 8, 9, 10 years older than me that had a recreational cycling team that they put together, and they asked me to go on a ride with them. It was a 25-mile ride. I hustled up a bicycle, and I went on that 25-mile ride. And at the end of that 25-mile ride, they were tired and I wasn't. So we thought, well, wait a minute, it should be the opposite. There's something unusual here. And that was where the first discovery about this unusual ability on a bicycle that I had physically to perform on a bicycle. And when I was 7, I wanted to become an Olympian. I thought that'd be the coolest thing ever, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. But I wanted to march into the stadium on the opening day's ceremony. parade. And so then I figured out, well, maybe this is how I'm going to do it, become an Olympic cyclist. And so that was the ambition at that point. Then the reality was that 25-mile ride. And then people that were outside the club, that were in formal racing clubs, saw something in me that they thought that would benefit incredibly from a level of guided mentorship. And eventually I found the world's greatest coach. And his deal was, Jeff, winning is a learned skill. I'm going to teach you how to win. I can't make you an Olympian. If you don't have it already within you, then there's nothing I can do to make that happen. But if you have it within you to become an Olympian, and you understand what it is that we're doing and why we're thinking the way that we're thinking, then you have the potential to become an Olympian. And so 10 years later, I was an Olympian in the Munich Olympics. And that was my journey there. I had the body, I had the mind, I had the physicality, I had the intelligence, if you can call it that. And I was willing to take good instruction. And with that combination of things, I was able to make that kind of first dream a reality. And it taught me a lot. And simultaneously, as I was training to become an Olympian, I was a scholarship student at USC studying sports science, exercise physiology, which would naturally be the case because of my athleticism, et cetera. And I was also exploring my art career. So I was juggling three balls at once that all proved to be really good choices for myself. So that's the cycling community. Then I went on to work with initially cyclists. After I got my master's degree in sports science, I helped athletes win a bunch of gold medals in the Olympics, in national and world championships, the Tour de France, et cetera. And the reason I could do that is because I experienced at the highest level what it takes to be a high potential, peak performer, because I did it as an Olympian. You can't study it and help people get there. You have to have that experiential link and the ability to communicate that. And simultaneously, then business people came to me and they wanted to become their own champions, and I could help them do that too, even though the locker room or the boardroom seem like they're different. They're not. It may be different technical sides to it, but what they experience as a performer, it's exactly the same experience. So that's how I got into the business world.
You tapped upon a lot of things there, and all of it comes down to, the locker room and the boardroom having that same focus, clarity, mental fortitude. And you said something too, even at a young age, you were willing to take the instruction. It was, you were willing to get better and learn from mistakes and push. Did you have mental training coaching back then? I mean, was that really a thing?
Well, I don't know about this mental coaching thing, quite honestly. It's like there are certain things that really are. And the most important thing is that you develop the technical capacity to do what it is that you want to do. And you can't think your way to a place that you're not prepared to go to. I think we need to recognize that first and foremost. And I've always had the self-start gene. I don't need any motivation for anybody. I don't need accolades to stay in the game long enough. I have a natural curiosity. I have a self-start gene. So that was really always there for me. And as I said, my coach taught me that winning or success is a learned behavior. It's not just a will of the mind. You can't, again, will yourself to a place that you don't believe you can get to, or you don't have the skills to get to. No amount of desire can get you to the place where you don't have the skills to get to. And I think that that's a really important thing that we need to be thinking about, because also when we look at this idea of mental training, we think it's all about visualization. Well, yeah, I think it is in part, but that's really not the whole story. I think it's more about biology than psychology, quite honestly. And here's the reason why I say that, is that if we look at ourselves from a biologic perspective, as science would agree to it as being, we could honestly say that we have kind of two different biologies that are working against each other for control over our decision making. We have our fear-based survival instinct. There's no disagreement between the scientists about the fact that we have a self-preservation biology behind us. That's our primary lens that we look at and experience life through. And if we have to survive to be able to have a chance to create an extraordinary life. Everybody knows what it's like to be afraid. Everybody knows what it's like to either fight or flight. and flee, or we know what it's like to freeze because we're so startled by something and we're paralyzed and we don't know what to do. Well, that's our biology. We didn't ask for that. That's hardwired into us. That's a feature that will be with us our entire life. But a fear-based decision making never creates a life of highest value because it's not based on that. It's based on self-preservation. But we also have instincts. Instincts are also biologic that are hardwired into us. So when we look up in the dictionary, what does it say about instincts? It says, well, the instincts that we have as a biologic species that are hardwired into us, we may think, well, it's procreation. Well, it's not. We may think, well, it's food. Well, it's not. We may think, well, it's shelter. Well, it's not. The highest instinct, hardwiring, biologic instinct that we have is to be a seeker. Look it up in the dictionary. Look it up. That's what all the experts say. Seeking is our highest instinct. Oh, well, if it's an instinct, it's hardwired into it. That's correct. An instinct towards what? Well, it's an instinct towards not survivorship, but it's an instinct towards seeking. Well, what are we seeking? We're seeking, like, let's say in Maslow's hierarchy, we're seeking self-actualization, AKA performing at our highest potential. So that's biologic too. So you can see that we have on one side of the aisle, we have this survival first dibs at every moment of our life because survival is the imperative, but you can't create a great life if you're afraid of everything and you're trying to avoid things or kill things. You can't get to a higher state of being in life experience. But we do have that other side of us, the instinct of seeking that wants to take us to bigger, higher outputs of taking our talents and creating a life based on that. So you can understand the inherent challenge that we all face every day. Should I do this? Should I do that? We feel this tug of war within us constantly throughout a lifetime. Too much, too little, too much, too little. And so my point being here is that that's not a psychology. You can't think your way to a better outcome unless we understand this biology. It doesn't work like that. And if we look at kind of the hierarchy of how this works, is that the body reacts before we know it because the body reacts faster than we can think. Why would I say that? Well, when I look at you, science has proven that because the nervous system takes information and sends it along the optic nerve to the visual cortex, because it runs along that nerve, well, that takes time. So I'm not seeing you in real time. I'm seeing you a quarter of a second later. But my brain's rearranging this at a point in time where it seems like it's now, but it's not now. See how that works? And so we have that force that is there that we need to be mindful of, because we can't outrun our biology. It's not possible. So the idea of just thinking our way somewhere, but it doesn't have the biological basis behind it. I think it's more we need an understanding of the biology first, and then maybe the psychology, because our body knows of threat before we're consciously aware of it. And then we have a perception of threat because we see how our body is responding. Sweaty palms, dilated pupils, racing heart, increased respiration, muscle tension. Those are all biologic reflexes. It's the gardener here, if you hear that.
We do, yeah.
It's classic. The gardeners show up on time. It's just absolutely classic.
We're adaptable.
Well, yeah, whatever expert. So my point is that, so your body through your nervous system responds to threat faster than we can consciously be aware of it. But then when we have an awareness of it, then it creates a state of being, fight, flight, or freeze. And then that state of being creates a belief. And that belief creates a story. And that story is something that we tell ourselves about the experience, which can then be considered the psychology of it. So I think psychology is the second part of this, and we need to understand how the body is put together, and we need to understand the biology behind it, because we can be very self-incriminating and we can blame ourselves forever for things that we think that we should be doing or that we should be beyond because of our age or our status in life, where that's not necessarily true. It's a hardwired biology. So I'll pause, and that may have been a mouthful. If it was too complicated, let me know, and I'll see if I can prune that back a little bit.
You know what? It's actually, there's so much to sink our teeth into there, but overall, incredibly validating to the TS community that they can't think or will their way out of this.
100%.
That I also am in full agreement with you that we need to learn the anatomy, the biology of what's going on with the body to create a sense of safety within it.
Yes.
There's the golden standard for treatment for Tourette syndrome is CBIT, cognitive behavioral intervention for tics. And the first part of it is awareness. And I can't think of a more full arena for somebody to develop their body awareness than movement, athletics, and physical sports.
Yeah.
To understand everything that you just explained there, you can find over time in movement and develop that part of you that understands how your body moves with and without tics.
Yes.
And everybody will converge in the same place here.
Well, yeah, and it's been well known that famous neurologists and people like that, psychologists and psychiatrists, if you want to build a better brain, what do? You go out dancing. That's what they say. It's not getting into a program or doing crossword puzzles or something like that. Not that that's not important for certain things, but we're just sort of saying that the body-mind connection here cannot be dismissed. I mean, if you look at the work of an absolute genius, Stephen Porges, with the polyvagal theory, he's a freaking genius that came up with this in the mid-90s. And he's an extraordinary researcher and literate and an esteemed scientist that had this new perspective that explains in explicit detail many of the things that we're talking about here. And so that would be somebody that would be worthy of investigation. Plus Peter Levine, who was not an academician, but a clinician. And Peter Levine was able to devise some very important therapeutic processes that can be applied that are very much involved with breath and movement to be able to address these nervous system phenomena, of which perhaps Tourette's is part of. But I think that there's a really important window there for exploration to understand other aspects of the biology. The biggest harm to me is that when we, the person, thinks we're the problem and we should have known better, and if only I was more perfect, I wouldn't have this situation. And that's not true. We don't ask for the nervous system and the nervous system respond in certain ways to certain phenomena that it's designed to respond to, that could be uniquely part of our gene pool. But nonetheless, these other areas of exploration, I think, are extraordinarily important. And I'm not presuming to be a scientist or an expert here. I'm only saying, as a person that's investigated this because of my own quest to understand the limitations that are imposed upon us that prevent us from playing at our full potential. What are those, and what does that look like? What is the genesis, and what are some of the tools to be able to address these in a well-reasoned, sensible manner?
I think all of this is something that people are capable of doing right now, while, maybe waiting to get into a neurologist or waiting to get into a psychologist, to be able to understand the biology of, fight or flight. It's kind of, there's trends in medicine and studying, and, fight or flight right now, everybody's becoming very aware of those terms, but to understand how that feeds into the nervous system and to understand how movement, the crossover of fight or flight with your movement system, what happens with involuntary tics with your central nervous system. Exploration is at the center of that. And every study I've come across that talks about increased sympathetic arousal and an increase of tics ultimately concludes we need more research. And the way to get there is, I think, conversation. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I was going to say the gardener's back here. He's a specialist.
He knows.
I really am going to encourage people to go, just, if I may say this and recommend this, you go watch polyvagal theory. You look at the videos, they're 3 and 4 minutes long. There are ones that are an hour or longer, but you just kind of listen.
Yeah.
Even Porges is the guy that originated this theory in 1996. And to me, it's absolute genius. It explains some things in a way that perhaps a lot of what we're looking for is already there. We just maybe kind of don't see it. But I would just suggest that people do this to just see what their resonance is with what's being said. Because I could tell you that there is one very impressive, it's a 24-minute video where there's this is actually Peter Levine's work. He's more the clinician that's taken Porges' work and created clinical methods out of this, where he's taken somebody that was had severe PTSD for being in the military and he was on medicine like forever, all sorts of things, and did all these therapies and stuff. And Peter Levine was able to tap into him by understanding this other way of looking at the challenges and the outcomes of challenges of certain things with the polyvagal theory, and go through some instructive things. It's a very impressive 24-minute video. I would suggest that people look at it only to see if there's a resonance there and a possibility that would provide some sort of an insight to them behind that, would be sort of my suggestion. And I have no bias towards where a person goes, but I think sometimes we do have at least clues that perhaps haven't necessarily been able to make it onto the headlines of certain journals and peer-reviewed things and things like that. But it doesn't mean that they're not worthy of at least the consideration. Not to saying that it replaces anything, but just an idea of investigation.
I love the way that you phrase that, to see what resonates with them. Like it's very much how do you respond to that? What is your own self-recognition within what you're hearing here? Does it make sense? Does it make you want to learn more? Did something stick out that might be helpful to you? But
yeah, if I could say another thing here, I think that is really important. Yeah, it's like, I had severe mercury poisoning about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It was the worst ever. I thought I was going to die. I probably would have too, by the way.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's.
And so what I did is that I went to all these specialists and they told me what the treatment was going to be, but there was something missing. They never had the problem. And they never shared with me what the patient experience is going to be. They only talked about therapies and stuff. And so I feel like we, as someone that is and has something, we have experienced it. Unless you've experienced it, it's really hard to understand it. And that's why I think probing and listening to what people are saying for that resonance, if you haven't experienced it, maybe you're intellectually making choices against it, but that's different than being someone that lives with this 24 hours a day. I can only imagine, with my mercury poisoning, am I going to die? Maybe. Am I going to ever get over this? Nobody knows. This would be similar with tics, I'm sure. And it creates a lot of apprehension. It creates a lot of uncertainty. It creates a lot of self-consciousness. It can create rage and anger. Why me? I'm sure I'm only expressing to you the way that I was feeling when I was sick like this. And I had nobody that told me how to manage this myself outside of, this is the treatment regimen. Take this 3 times a day, do this, blah, 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 blah. And so I feel that it's very fair for us to look around and see what people are saying and that are discovering, that have been someone that has lived with the condition. because I'm not always sure that if we haven't had it, we can appreciate it only through intellectual connection, through what the data in the literature says.
I mean, we just did an episode on rage attacks. You hit a lot of components with the thinking. Is it going to be this way forever? Will I have this forever? Will it ever subside? When it does subside, then it changes, in its ever changing presentation, all of the same thing, all of the same thought process that you went through with mercury poisoning of, is this permanent? Is this what life is like now?
That's why,
And
sorry.
Not at all. No, I was done.
Well, that's why if you just watch the 24 hour,
We can do that too. 24 minute.
The 24-minute Peter Levine interview where he interviews a client of his that came to him that had severe PTSD, and they did have tics, et cetera, that were associated with this. It was a complex of a variety of different things, but he actually discusses and demonstrates some of the things that he did that really dramatically improved this person's life, and the person kind of shared his experience with this. And it's like, again, as the patient, I'm not sure that anybody can understand the challenges associated with being a patient with something, because I know when I had mercury poisoning, people say, oh, I have a headache too, but let's go out and have fun. Well, you don't understand. I can't have fun because I feel like I'm going to die. Oh yeah, I know, me too. I've had that before. Come on, let's just go out and have fun. They don't get it.
They draw upon the closest experience that they might
have
with that, but it's still not the same. Yeah,
it's not the same way. I think just an awareness of that. If we have it, we shouldn't condemn others for their good wishes and their inability to understand our experience as we're living it. I'm just kind of saying that we should have the latitude to explore certain things that, again, have a resonance, and there's an attraction and a gravity between us and it, to investigate it and to follow that path. And so I was suggesting two things: polyvagal theory. The academician Stephen Porges is the one that created it. He's not a clinician. Peter Levine is the guy who's the clinician that does it. He's also a PhD, psychology, really smart guys. Both these guys are. They've been around for 50 years. They know what they're doing because they have a body of evidence behind them. I guess that's all I want to say at this point in time in our conversation.
I get that. I'll put those links in the show note too. I'll find that video and put it on. I personally chased movement and did not understand how polyvagal theory, still applied to me until after I kept chasing movement and then burnt myself out and then had adrenal fatigue because I kept chasing movement, going without really understanding, how to use it, how to use movement and exercise as a tool.
Yeah.
Until I already was burnt out. And then even as a trainer, I'd go into one of the studios at the gym. I would darken the lights. I would put on my calming playlist, put in my earbuds, and then just slow move. Like I was looking for safety in my body and did not know that was, I don't want to use the word protocol, but that was a tool. That was a tool that I could use at my disposal. And then it became a tool. Body rolling became a tool to find safety within the body, which also goes back to your point of kind of biology first. I couldn't just think, oh, feel safe. I'm okay. I had to feel it. Correct. Whether it was releasing, my shoulder muscle that was ticking nonstop that day, whether it was, doing some stretches to calm down my QL when my hips wouldn't stop twisting, but to feel safe first goes to the biology first. And then you can build upon that.
Exactly right. Because again, like the vagus nerve is on threat alert 24 hours a day. And when it doesn't have play to relax, there is no recovery.
Right.
Therefore, what happens is that the nervous system retunes itself where now it's on threat 24 hours a day because it doesn't have enough play. And that could be from, stress. It could be from emotional trauma. It could be through all sorts of things, but what's unique too, and Porges pointed this out, he found that when the nervous system is the autonomic nervous system is imbalanced, meaning that it's now in a sympathetic dominant state where it's on a hypervigilant state, responding because it takes every second as a threat. It, number one, can't relax, but one of the little muscles in the ear that attaches to the smallest bone in the body, that's part of how frequencies that are sound waves go into our ear that are then transferred and made into nerve impulses, which is part of the hearing process. It now selects that so that the sounds that we hear are sounds of threat now, because it's retuned itself to listen to the sounds of threat. So people hear things differently. You may have experienced this when you get sick. When you get sick, you're irritated by everything. Like somebody's breathing, that bugs you. Well, it doesn't bug you when you're not sick. It's a retuning of it. So the biology can become altered in such a way that it's actually stuck on continuous threat. And therefore, it's a scratch on a record that just keeps playing itself out over and over and over, like a looped tape. And again, you can't mentally take yourself out of that, because memory can be stored in the body. And you can read a couple of books there. There's Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis by James Oshman. He's a complete wizard. He's an academician. He's wrote an authoritative couple of books that demonstrate very clearly about what happens in situations like this. So we do have a lot of clues that maybe haven't made their way into the common dialogue yet, that should not negate or disqualify these things from being of value. And so again, the idea of trauma, meaning that we're exposed to things that we don't have the physical or mental capacity to be able to deal with. They're kind of unresolved challenges that remain stuck, like in the body, in the tissues. And Oshman makes it in a compelling, very authoritative description of what that means, because when you say that, it seems sort of elusive to people, like, well, how can something get stuck in the body? Well, he explains that with a great accuracy and in language that most of us can understand. But if we don't understand it, it all goes back to us. There's something wrong with me.
Right.
If I was better, it wouldn't be like this. Well, that's not really true. And that changes how we adjust to life. It sets up certain biologic responses that are well known to present themselves as relates to ongoing stress. So we do have some really important clues here that should be worthy of a further investigation.
I agree. It investigation and exploration with open eyes, open ears, and resonance. I love that you use that word. What resonates with you? That's your first stepping stone to go down a path to learn things about your own body, about your own tics, about your own tick triggers.
Yes.
'Cause I mean, I think that's another common thing people say, well, just we do need to learn our triggers, but you're not going to do that overnight. And they might even change too. But when you have a tick trigger, there's your sympathetic arousal. What tools can you develop in your toolbox to tap into a more parasympathetic dominant state? And everything that we're describing here, if we were to do a very, very brief overview of the nervous system, we have the central nervous system, which is the spinal cord and the brain, the heart structures that you mentioned earlier. And then in our peripheral nervous system, we have our motor, we have our sensory, somatic, autonomic, and in that autonomic is the parasympathetic, sympathetic, and then polyvagal theory fits into the parasympathetic down there.
Yeah, it does.
Kind of
Yeah, because what it does, it tells the it tells the vagus nerve that you're not on threat anymore.
right.
And that's it. So there's another side of this, not another side, but another complementary concept here, is that it's the idea of breathing.
I was just going to bring that up as well. Yeah.
Breathing is the fundamental biology of anything. If you look at some of the authoritative authors that have written about breathing, I'm not just talking about James Ensor, in his very important pilgrimage in importance of the breathing exercise, but there's some very important research that's been around for 50 years that gives us an insight, really biology and fundamental life processes all begins with breath. And I've never heard anybody really talk about the mechanics of that. Yeah, they've talked about diaphragmatic breathing and things like that, but I've never really felt that the biology of that was shared in a way that it deserves to be shared. And I only know that because when I studied this stuff, like in 1990, when I was reading a couple of these books outside the curriculum of what I was supposed to read for, getting my certification, all that crap, it was very different. And I could see that, breathing is the fundamental biology that everything else is packaged on top of. And it is an access point into the sympathetic dominance versus parasympathetic like restoration. And so, again, I'm sure that many of your people that follow you, they're aware of this, but I just wanted to kind of emphasize the point that there are ways of looking at the breathing process, the anatomy and the physiology of it, and exercises that can be done that, again, kind of take the strain out of the system and allow the parasympathetic side to be a little bit more dominant in that.
What lights me up from inside is in speaking with everybody, at the elite level that you coach, that you've performed, with other movement professionals I've spoken to, everybody figures that part out.
Yeah.
And there actually is a great book. Jill Miller wrote it. It's basically a textbook on the anatomy of how breathing systems work. And I love that approach for the TS community because I think we're burnt out on being just told, slow down your breath, calm down. I mean, I still tell that to myself, and whether it's effective or not, it's more effective when I feel it, when I have a tool to basically release the muscles. If I'm in, like a chest style breath, my little first ribs going, my shoulders are elevating. When I can release those and then take another breath, the sensation of it is more powerful than the words, always. And then in understanding how my own diaphragm works, because breathing is actually a very common tick too. And it was my biggest common tick. And swimming is swimming in my elementary years through high school is what led me down to the path where I am today right now, because swimming regulated my breath. And I didn't know why at the time, but that was my first inlet to something else having an influence on my tics.
Yeah, it would be similar to playing a clarinet or an instrument because your breath, excuse me, your breath has to be held and it has to be exhaled at certain points in time to be able to play the whatever it is that you're playing in the music that you're reading. So again, that's another confirmation about this. And I think that, again, adds some value that requires ongoing investigation to be able to have us tap into gaining a certain level of control over, perhaps even eliminating the causes of the tic phenomena. Again, I'm not an expert in this. I'm just sharing with you what I know to be true about the whole litany of high performance. And I could tell you this, is that when you ask an Olympian, how do you win the gold medal? They say, I don't know. This is when I ran it. I didn't even think about it. So it was all about the preparation that they did, and they trusted their preparation, and they didn't get too mentally perfectionistic in their own mind about what was required to win, providing that you're properly trained so that your full fitness is able to, demonstrate it, in competition, etc. I think these are all really critical elements, really, of this. To this
It's
point,
interesting. Yeah. It's I played water polo as well, and we would do Olympic clinics where the national team would come and do drills with us, and it would be a whole, multi-day event. And we would do locker room talk where we could go in there and just ask them anything.
Yeah.
And one of the girls was one of the youth players in my group was asking one of the Olympians, how do you do it day after day? Like, how do you do the laps? How do you keep going? Basically, she didn't know how to ask, like, how do you not get burnt out? How do you keep going? What is it? She was so young, she didn't know how to ask that question. But more importantly, the Olympian didn't understand the question. What do you mean, how do I keep going? What do you And another one had to join in. I think I know what she's asking. And then they finally, discuss discipline, motivation versus burnout versus, but there's something about that mindset of perseverance and resilience that is another component.
I think there's a lot of mythology out there because remember, I mentioned to you that we have two opposing mentalities that are hardwired into us. The first mentality is what I call the human mindset. It's human because we all have it. Mindset is rigid. Mindset doesn't think, it only responds. Where the other side of this is the champion's mind. Mind is a living, breathing organism that thoughtfully considers options and contexts and chooses the best option. That is not what a mindset does. A mindset is incredibly rigid. I want it bad enough, I'll get it. Well, that's not necessarily true. Champion's mind would say, well, look, yes, there's a possibility of here. This is what I've got to do to be able to get there. It's not just my will crush it. It's not like that. So it kind of does go back to these fundamental aspects of biology that I think that we need to be mindful of. I feel like anything that's a mindset is rigid. It's one thing leads to many things. It's an act of will in repetition. I don't think that it shows any level of creativity or understanding of the circumstances. It may not be the best choice. And I just feel like that would be like an impulse type of thing for the most part. I'm sure there's nuances to this that we could go into further, but just to sort of say that I think having a mind that thinks thoughtfully and looks at things and considers things and makes good decisions based upon body of evidence and timing and intensity of things triumphs just the brute force of applying one thing with will. I find that far exceeds the benefits of that one way of looking at things. When I say something, I mean it and I'm going to do it. Okay, well, what if it becomes obsolete? You still going to do it? What if there's contrarian information that says that this is not a good idea now? You're just going to do it? So I just feel like there's a whole other level that I know because I live in that space and I advise people at this space that's beyond the simplistic idea of a rigid mindset or recital of something. Or if I learn a book and I do what the book says, I'll embody what the book says. Well, maybe there's a personalized side to this that we need to look at that would provide a more useful result from the time and energy that we're putting into this. So again, I think there are many factors that fall into this conversation that are not exclusive to the topic of tick or whatever the more appropriate terminology would be for that is, that are universal in our ability to live a life that's built on what we know to be true about our abilities, our talents. I think there's so much mythology out there, but the mythology may make sense to the human mindset. Want it bad enough. I got to be perfect. I want to be like everybody else. I'm afraid, so I won't even try. I'll make my decisions out of what I stand to lose. It's in my genes. All that's garbage. Those are ideas and thoughts that have never proven themselves to be true. There's a whole other way of kind of looking at this. I mean, why are you giving creativity and ingenuity and curiosity? Well, that's because you'll find a way to get from where you are to where you want to get to. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to do one or two things that count. Stop whining. Start believing in your winning, rather than saying, well, I'm afraid, so I won't even try. Why don't you trust your preparation? Just show up and do it. So there's all sorts of other ways of doing this that take the pressure and the tension out of the process. And that's what I found to really deliver on the promise. I think a lot of this stuff is upside down because again, we have two natures. You know, we think more is better. You know, like for example, you could take an instrument and think that if I have a high-powered ultrasound device, the higher power I use, the faster I'm going to recover. Well, that's not true because biologic responses to therapeutic processes, it's all about the right power and the right frequency. It's not about more power is better. There have been experiments that have been done where they have a device and they turn it up, and guess what happens? Nothing. You turn it down to a billionth of an ampere, which is barely perceptible, then the immune system starts working again. So there's a whole mythology that surrounds a lot of this that I'm aware of because of my history and like my background.
Right.
And I don't feel like I got to defend myself. I just do what I know. Science tells us that's there, and we create a clinical model out of it, and we apply that to the people that we work with, and you can have some remarkable results, by doing that. So I hope in our time today, at least, there have been some items, worthy of consideration here that people find is valuable and doable, and it keeps us engaged in their perhaps areas that have not been fully explored enough, personally or professionally, that can create access to other ways of getting to the finish line where we would like to get to.
Like that, I think, is such an example of unique thinking that you bring to anybody you work with, that you can lay your path forward. It's not set for you.
It's not.
And you can be adaptable, you can be flexible, resilience can be taught.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I actually know no more resilient group than the TS group. I think resilience is kind of forced upon us in the beginning, when ticks are at their highest.
Yeah.
But once anybody, and again, back to your point, this is with and without ticks, this is just any human, resilience can be taught.
Yes.
And if then going back to the TS community, if we can give them movement outlets that match what they enjoy, because you're going to keep doing the things that you enjoy. We're not going to keep doing things that we're not good at, that we hate. But then for anybody to do something that you enjoy, that's an outlet that might actually help with the tick management too. That kind of goes back to some CBIT principles, which is looking at competing response and opposing muscle groups to ticks. There's just this beautiful world you could create for yourself with tick management.
Well, yeah, and we all have an individual biology that needs to be explored, and I think a key thing to this is to be gentle on the expectation of trying something new, because we
I
love
love that.
because we love to get revved up on the promise that maybe this is it.
Yeah.
But it can lead to a lot of frustration when it doesn't deliver, and we have kind of no guarantee on certain things because of our biologic individualities. I think it's important that we show up and we really practice our breathing rituals in a very thoughtful, deliberate way, to live in the present moment and not try to live too much into the future, because that can create massive frustration. And if we can hold composure in the moment while we're exploring, and we call it an exploration, and we realize that everybody has an individual key that unlocks the lock to gain access to these things, and we show a level of restraint in the process. And I think those are all really important things in this, because if we invest too heavily in things outside of ourselves, and I know how desperately we want answers to our circumstances, because I lived it as a patient,
Yeah.
visit for the patient, man. It's like my life was hell, you know, and it's like, I trust me, man, I've lived it. So I know. And to me, we have to kind of hold this sacred in a sense that we just need to proceed ahead, and we need to demonstrate a level of control isn't the right word, but we want to show a level of restraint against human impulses to invest in things or do things that uh, set us up for potential failure unnecessarily. And that all goes back, if a person doesn't understand, or I think that a person needs to understand that there's two parts of us that are currently working against each other. It's our survival impulses that are faster than we can think, that's hardwired into us. There is no disagreement to that. There is a fight or flight or freeze biology that is there, that's autonomic, that we can have some influence over, but we can't extract it from our biology. And we can also acknowledge the fact that our highest instinct is to seeking what? Well, seeking self-actualization. Yeah, well, that's a great aspiration, because then we're, playing at the level of what our talents are, but that's a lifetime process. You just don't arrive one day and then everything self-perpetuates. It's not like that. It's almost like it's a life practice is what it is, that needs to be applied to be maintained. And that's what I think is important from an overarching overall perspective. That's not what our human nature wants. Our human nature wants everything now, because we're afraid and we want some level of assurance. That's our human nature. The champion's nature, that other side of us, recognizes that, every one of us has got our own challenges that we've got to face. There are no exemptions from that. It's all part of the human experience. And if we can develop a sensible approach to this, that shows a well-reasoned respect, and we demonstrate a restraint against setting ourselves up for intense frustration, we create a more favorable environment for ourselves. And I'm going to have to kind of scoot here in a second,
Sure.
but I want to just say one last story here, if I may.
Sure.
I was working with an athlete. He was at the top of his game, world champion. I helped him win a bunch of championships. And then he took himself for granted. And he was a motorcycle racer. And in one of the practices before a race, he was found face down in the mud. And they asked him, move your legs, move your toes. Move your toes, please. He said, I'm trying. He got paralyzed. And so imagine a champion guy being now paralyzed. Well, I'm going to beat this thing. Well, okay, that's yet to be seen here, but let's sort of work on what's in front of us. He became extraordinarily self-destructive to himself and his family. So I got together with him and I said, because I love this guy, I said, let me get this straight. So you're going to be the most destructive human being on the planet to yourself and your family. And then once you walk again, you're going to be Mr. Nice Guy. Is that the rules on this? It stopped him in his tracks, man. It's like, I said, well, what if you don't? What are you going to do? So that changed his life. But the most important thing I want to say here is that he forgot who he was.
Yeah.
He was a champion. And because he thought that was taken away from him, he basically shut down because he had no purpose in his life. And so then he went on to, I said, well, let's find an alternative sport. Let's race wheelchairs in the Kona triathlon. You could be champion of the world. So it took him 3 years, but he did become champion of the world in a different sport because he reacquainted himself with the champion that he was, that he forgot when he got paralyzed. So I think it's really important that we realize that there's something in us that will not die. There's something in us that wants to perform at a certain level. And there is something that we do need to be mindful of, to have something to get up every day to, that we can contribute to humanity while we're working out the challenges that we all face as human beings. So, with your culture, we're not dismissing the importance and the challenges associated with this, but we're saying that simultaneously, as we're working our way through the exploration of this, as we're learning more, we're applying different things, we still need to kind of be mindful of who we are as a human. And we need to come from that place, because we can teach people a lot, and that level of restraint can fortify us with a lot of respect for ourselves, for demonstrating a control over something while we're investigating something else. And that to me is a very important part of this journey that everybody takes like in their own way.
Unreal, absolutely unreal. You know, the last thing I'll say here, which pulls my earbud out, the last thing I'll say here that falls upon that is a question that took me 20 years to figure out what the question was. And it's, to what extent can neuroplasticity driven by voluntary movement choices help with neurological conditions?
Could you say that again, please?
To what extent can neuroplasticity, the ability of the mind to adapt, driven by voluntary movement choices, no matter the circumstance, no matter whether you're paralyzed in a chair, no matter whether you have tics, no matter whether you were a youth athlete and haven't done anything for 20 years, to what extent can neuroplasticity driven by voluntary movement choices help neurological conditions?
Okay, what I'm going to suggest here is that everybody go and read about Emily Conrad, Emily Conrad, and she will present to you, I think, some amazing clinical data about movement that is irrefutable. I would suggest that.
I'm going to put all of these in the show notes. The
Emily-
24-minute polybagel, Emily Conrad.
Emily Conrad, check her out. She was a dancer, and the information in the stories will speak for itself. So again, I want to thank you so much for this very generous time.
Thank you. This was absolutely eye-opening, and I appreciate your perspective and your work and your time coming on here. I'm excited to send this out into the world. Thank you so much, Jeff.
You're welcome. I look forward to our next conversation. Be well, everybody. And
most absolutely.
Onward and upward. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye now.
We love providing a platform for sharing ideas about living with Tourette syndrome and other tic disorders. While we strive to keep the content evidence-based, please understand that exercise science, information about Tourette syndrome, and its co-occurring conditions are constantly evolving. The content shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. By listening to this podcast, you agree to not use the information as a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment for yourself or your child. As always, consult your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions or starting any treatments related to Tourette syndrome or other health conditions, which also includes mental health. This disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast. TickFit and the podcast team do not take any responsibility for any actions taken based on the information provided. Our goal is to educate, support, and raise awareness, not to diagnose or treat any medical condition. Thanks for listening.